Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm your friendly host and commentator, Brandon. And today we have some updates from Michigan, where I happen to live. So we got a couple of different updates. We're going to get this one out first. Seems to be the biggest headline we have. This is the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. Had a press conference earlier today talking about the boxes full of petitions that they're about to churn in. Marijuana group files signatures for Michigan proposal. A group seeking to legalize recreational marijuana in Michigan turned in roughly 365,000 signatures to the state Monday, setting the stage for a potential 2018 ballot proposal and campaign that organizers say could cost millions of dollars. The Michigan Bureau of Elections will review the signatures to determine if at least 252,523 are valid, as required to advance to the initiated legislation. The Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol raised and spent nearly $1 million during its statewide petition drive and hopes to raise about $8 million more for the campaign, said spokesman Josh Hovey. And that's Josh right there. Oops. So here's a quote, "We need to keep on raising money and do what we need to continue to communicate with voters across the state, and that doesn't come cheap," he said. The proposal would regulate marijuana production and retail sales in Michigan, building on the state's new system for licensing medical marijuana businesses. It calls for a 10% excise tax with revenue dedicated to roads, schools, and local governments. And I've done extensive coverage about my legalizing the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. I've I've read the language. I've done videos about it. There's even a video that is called Legalizing Marijuana or Ending Prohibition, in which I make comparisons to that and another petition drive that's still ongoing, the Abrogate Michigan. So you can look at that to learn more about this. And also, I interviewed a person from My Legalized twice, Colin McDougall. He's heavily involved with the campaign this year and was involved with the campaign last year. So, I mean, you can find out a lot about what's going on with this just by watching some of my old videos or go to their website. The link to the actual ballot language is in the description below as well. So, yeah, it calls for a 10% excise tax. Yeah, we already talked about that. Residents could generally carry up to 2.5 ounces of the drug or possess up to 10 ounces in their home, but smoking would not be allowed on public sidewalks. The Legalization Committee has several hurdles to clear before its measure qualifies for the 2018 ballot, beginning with a state review process that Secretary of Spokesman Fred Woodhams said could take about 60 days. Bureau of Elections staff will pull a random sample of signatures and make them public, allowing for potential challenges to their validity. The Bureau will then prepare a report for the Board of Statewide Canvassers, which will decide whether to approve the signature submission. Hovey told reporters that the group is confident in its signatures. Most were collected by paid circulators with the National Petition Management of Brighton, which validated signatures as they were turned in. Others were collected by volunteers, including those with the activist-led My Legalized group that ran its own petition drive in 2016. Quote, "We worked with some of the best election lawyers in the state in terms of drafting the ballot initiative itself," Hovey said. "So we're very confident that the language itself will be standing up to a legal challenge. If advanced by the Board of State Canvassers, the Michigan legislature will have 40 session days to approve or reject the measure. If legislators do nothing, it will go to the November 2018 general election ballot. If they propose an alternative, both measures would go before voters." former state rep Jeff Irwin, an Ann Arbor Democrat serving as a political director for the Ballot Committee, said he does not anticipate action by the state legislature. Quote, the public is way ahead of the political class on this issue, he said. The public knows that cannabis prohibition is the granddaddy of all failed big government programs. While some law enforcement officials have raised concerns with the marijuana proposal, it has not yet faced any significant organized opposition. A group called the Committee to Keep Pot Out of Neighborhoods and Schools has raised $5,000 through October 20th, according to state records. Chris DeWitt, a spokesman for the opposition group, issued a statement Monday calling the legalization proposal ill-advised and not in the public interest. Is that all you got? Or is that all $5,000 would buy? While the proposal would regulate the legalized commercial marketplace, it would also allow adults to grow up to 12 marijuana plants inside their home for personal use without a license. DeWitt argued that home grow provision would allow mass quantities of unregulated, untested, and untaxed marijuana to be grown by anybody anywhere, creating a true black market for illegal drugs. And what I got to say to that, so far I haven't really had a whole lot to say. I knew this was coming. This was obviously their campaign was on schedule to do exactly what just happened, and I don't anticipate any trouble with the review process either. And basically, I feel however I feel about their overall proposal. You can go watch my videos. I talk about it a lot. I'm of the mindset that we can do better, but if this is where we're at, I'm pretty much saying that it's better than what we have now. And what we have now, and let's face it, this is Michigan. What we have now is a free-for-all setup where the cops kick in your door and steal everything you got if weed's involved. That's where we're at. They don't care about your medical cards. They don't care about your caregiver status or none of that shit. Now, what we will see somebody say somewhere along the line in one of these articles is that Michigan has like prosecutors that are like, hey, these cases ain't holding up too good anymore. So, you better bring me something good. Don't just go kicking doors in willy-nilly. Now the forfeiture story, that's a whole nother ball game. But even in that game, they realize that if you're going to kick a door in just to steal someone's shit, the case better be somewhat worthy because they might get their shit back, But basically what I'm getting at is what I got to say about this comment right here. Mass quantities of unregulated, untested, and untaxed marijuana will be grown by anybody anywhere, creating a true black market for illegal drugs. Now, first of all, there is already a true black market for illegal drugs. We're trying to take marijuana away from that, but the regulations might hinder the marijuana from budging all the way out of the black market. But still, even if marijuana was gone, the black market for illegal drugs is there. I mean, there's crack, there's heroin, there's people illegally selling pharmaceutical drugs. You also have like the whole psychedelic world of drugs, and marijuana. Just everywhere where drugs are sold, you can probably get some marijuana there too. Because, my problem with DeWitt's statement here is that we have a system like that for beer and alcohol in general and tobacco, not for liquor. If you want to distill your own spirits, you do have to go through the government. They don't just willy-nilly let anybody have a still. Because you could do more than just make alcohol with it. I mean, it's like you can do a lot of chemistry with just a still, or having a still in addition to a bunch of other pieces of glass. But basically what I'm getting at is, what are you trying to say? You're acting like people growing 12 plants at home. First of all, my experience with that, and if you live somewhere where people can grow their own weed, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just because you're allowed to grow 12 plants in your home doesn't mean that a lot of people start growing 12 plants in their home. it's still a thing to try to grow plants, man. It's not like the easiest thing in the world. It's fun, and learning can be fun, but learning can be expensive too if you lose a lot of money and you don't do it good. But this whole idea that you're creating this giant black market, it's horseshit. And B, you can already do things like grow your own tobacco plants to a certain extent, make your own beer, you can make your own wine, you can make several hundred gallons of beer and wine a year for personal use. And no one's getting out there making a black market with it. So, you're ignoring the fact that there's a legal marijuana market being proposed. And when the legal marijuana market's there and you have a store where you can just go to and buy some fucking weed at a reasonable price, not a whole lot of people's going to give too much of a fuck about growing 12 plants. Pot legalization proposals in other states have prompted expensive fights, and Michigan organizers expect the same here. Whether they can raise the money or not, we'll have to see. But I think we have to plan and do the work to assume there's going to be very strong opposition. Hovey said, and I did cover that in my interviews with Colin McDougall. He basically, he said that of course they're going to do their money raising and try to do whatever advertising they can. And there's also the outside groups, and there's national groups that are already here with billboards and doing things. So expect Michigan to be the new battleground state for legalizing marijuana. It's getting kind of old, and we'll be the ninth one. Well, actually, we'll be the 10th one because we had the ninth one was Arizona, but they lost. So we'll actually be the 10th one to be a battleground state. And if you looked into it like I did, and I actually made a video about it, it wasn't very popular, but Arizona was the battleground state last election cycle. They were where everybody was like, oh, we better look at Arizona to see if they legalize cannabis or not, and it was like all the money for the efforts on both sides. The pro-marijuana people were putting money in. The anti-marijuana people were putting money in. Discount Tire was throwing money in. Incest Therapeutics. It was all that was focused on Arizona. Will that happen in Michigan? Man, I don't know. See, the thing is, I don't have TV. I don't watch TV, so I don't catch the commercials. So I'm not going to see all the reefer madness, but you better believe I'm going to report on it when I do see it. So that's what I think about that. While marijuana remains illegal at the federal level, Michigan voters legalized medical use in 2008. Voters in 8 other states have subsequently approved recreational marijuana laws. Michigan could be the only state in the Midwest with a recreational proposal on the ballot in 2018, Hovey said, making it a potential battleground for interest groups around the country that support or oppose legalization. Quote, we are working to attract national interest on our side of things, he said. I'm sure there's opposition groups that will be doing the same thing. And a little bit of tidbits here and there from other publications. Here's the Seattle Times. Wow. Yeah, we don't need to read all that. So there's really nothing new here. Here's some more quotes from Hovey, Josh Hovey. Oftentimes, it's just adults using a plant that is less harmful than alcohol or tobacco, he said at a news conference a couple of blocks from the State Bureau of Elections. Quote, it's breaking up families, it's destroying communities. We can impose some regulations, create a new industry in the state. You're going to see not only the tax benefits of that, but jobs, less crime, and letting law enforcement go after things that are more important. Now, they talk about the Republican-controlled legislature. Yes, it is. But they're the ones that passed those medical marijuana laws last year. And like I said, sure, they could write their own proposal for legalizing and regulating regular marijuana. But they could also propose just going through the old law and crossing out the word medical everywhere. I mean, anyway, they got 40 days to do whatever the fuck they think they're going to do and put it on the ballot. They don't have to put that on the ballot. They did all those changes last year without putting it on the ballot. But basically they would have to make that kind of a change. They would have to get a significant amount of votes in the House and the Senate. And I don't know, man, if there's that much support amongst the deeply Republican controlled legislator to actually legalize marijuana. I'm doubting it. I'm going to say no. They've been getting more right wing every year up there in Lansing, so I don't know. Legislators could propose an alternative marijuana bill. Organizers do not expect the legislator to consider their proposal. Yeah. Jeff Irwin says, based on my experience working in that legislature, I don't think we would have a majority of votes for a sensible legalization bill. True, but don't expect anything that they put out to be sensible unless it's to give it away to the big corporations like we already see them doing in the other realm with their laws that they wrote last year for the medical marijuana program in Michigan. Here's the proposed language. Like I said, it doesn't kill you to read it. It's not too incredibly boring or long. You can kind of skip a lot of it once you see that of the repetitious nature of the legal jargon and rambling ons. But if you want to get this super duper fancy highlighted version that I made of it, you can't. But you can go back and watch the video I made about it. I don't know. Gee, that was about 6 months ago, I would say. Here's the normal write-up on it, and I just pulled this bottom part here. Proponents of the effort, the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, include members of the Marijuana Policy Project of the ACLU of Michigan, the Drug Policy Alliance, the National Patients' Rights Association, Michigan NORML, My Legalize, the Michigan Cannabis Coalition, and lawyers from the State Bar of Michigan Marijuana Law Section. Today's press conference is archived in the Coalition's Facebook pages here. I'll go ahead and put that also in the links below for you. There you go, just to prove it. Advocates sought to place a similar measure on the Michigan ballot in 2016. That ever was ultimately churned back when lawmakers imposed and the courts upheld new rules limiting the time frame during which signatures could be collected. Marijuana law reform advocates are presently gathering signatures for voter initiatives or initiated efforts in Missouri and Utah. Proponents of medical marijuana initiative in South Dakota have turned in their signatures and are awaiting a review by the Secretary of State's office. And a statewide initiative legalizing the use of medical marijuana in Oklahoma has already qualified for the 2018 electoral ballot. And that's it for that story. What else do I have to say about it? Not a whole lot. Like I said, boom. It's regulations, but it is legalization. I looked at it, and there is wiggle room for the police to still be involved in the, code enforcement or whatever. But overall, it's better than what we got now, and I mean that's the only thing I could really say in a positive way. I read the article that Radical Russ put out about 2 weeks ago-ish, maybe not even. And he was like, man, people like me, I guess he was talking about people like me. We got to stop complaining about, what we feel like legalization should look like. And I think it was called something like, we got to legalize what people are doing now with marijuana. And I kind of see what his point is there too. Like if people are growing weed at their house and it's legitimate or whatever, bringing them in to the light somehow. I don't know. But basically, I do know this. All them arguments all lead to this idea that we got to go slow and crawl towards the end of Prohibition. I don't buy that, man. Prohibition was illegally thrown at us by the corporations that lobbied with people inside the government to basically demonize marijuana. And then make it illegal, and then make hemp and marijuana was both made illegal at the same time, which is suspicious as hell. Anybody that looking in would be like, okay, marijuana, okay, they're trying to do some other prohibition. It was kind of under the radar. It wasn't like a big counterculture thing like it is these days. So, or like it was at one time. It's getting kind of mainstream now. So overall, basically, that was how the original prohibition started. But then Nixon came along and really put a underscore and made it bold that this is totally just an attack on people. This is not some kind of thing where you're like, oh, we got to make marijuana illegal because it's a public health problem. No, he straight up was basically doing it so he could go after his enemies, which was black people and activists, mainly the anti-Vietnam War activists. That's it. Knowing that, just that alone. And then you tell me that marijuana is a public health issue? No, it ain't. Marijuana is the safest substance we can work with. I can go on and on. You've heard all my rants, so that's that. And then I did this story too already. There's a video about it, or it's in another video about Michigan. I can't remember which. But so the governors that are running for Michigan, in 2018, they'll be on the ballot with this marijuana legalization proposal. So it isn't a question of whether or not you support legalizing marijuana. All right, guys, if you're running for fucking governor, that's pretty much irrelevant because we're gonna fucking vote that shit in a landslide fashion. There's no doubt at all that if the regulate marijuana like alcohol, there's going to be some negative campaigning coming out from people that think that this legalization isn't the right legalization, like Russ said. And I've probably been guilty of kind of criticizing this proposal a little bit too much at times. But I'm not going to be that person. I'm not going to go out there and try to take votes away from this. This is going to pass. And in my opinion, it's going to pass in a landslide. And furthermore, this is going to get people going to the fucking to go vote that normally wouldn't even go vote. So it's not a matter of whether you support or back recreational use. It's a matter if you have some nuance and know some shit about it, maybe studied the issue a little bit. And as we've seen, when I read the article the first time, each one of them's got their own little nuance. Like Gretchen Whitmer, she's leading in the polls. Apparently she's neck and neck with Bill Schuette, the Republican favorite already, early in the race. And Bill Schuette, let's not make any mistake about it. When I just said earlier, it's not a question of if you're fucking supporting it. It's a question of how hard do you support it and what's your nuance, what's your narrative. Bill Schuette don't have a nuance or a narrative. He has been nothing but a thorn in the side of medical marijuana the whole time he's been in office. And furthermore, he's backed off the issue because he knows that it's a non-starter for him in his bid for running for governor. So if we're running just on the issue of marijuana, any of the Democrats are going to win in a landslide. And there's even a Republican that's running on legalizing who is a veteran of one of the wars with PTSD. Whitmer, like I said, she's leading in the polls. Here in Michigan, we're going to embrace the legalization, but we're also going to grow our economy. I think she's talking about hemp. Somebody else was talking about hemp. Abdul El Sayed also talking about this being a civil rights issue. And then you have, here's the Republican guy. Let's turn it into an agricultural boon. Michigan already grows corn. Why not turn our state greener to improve our environment? So, if you're running for governor of Michigan in 2018, you know that fucking marijuana legalization is on the ballot. And you know that they're going to be talking about that quite heavily. It's going to be one of the biggest issues going, for real. And it's going to get people going to the ballot box to vote for it. And they're, the people that'll go to the ballot box that would have voted against it or whatever, they're that small little smidgen of minority of right-wing Republican evangelical 80,000-year-old people that are still somehow alive and breathing enough to make it to the polls or send in their absentee ballot or whatever. Those people are going to go vote anyway. We don't have no problem motivating those people to go vote. They always go vote. They vote like they go to church. It's like guaranteed every time something comes up to vote for it, they're going to be there to vote for it. So we know they're going to be there. But people are going to be there that normally don't vote. And they're going to vote for marijuana because that's their right. And, you know, whether you like the proposed language or not, the truth be told is I would say a good 50 to 60% of the people that go vote don't know a fucking thing about it. That's just the fact of life that we live with. And the only way that they're going to get educated on the actual details of it is if the fucking legislator does decide to put their own proposal on the ballot. And if they do, then, you know, it's going to clearly give the whole industry to just a few people and make the rules so hard that nobody can play ball. We know what the Republicans in Lansing are fucking capable of. And that's what they'll write, because they'll be like, hey, man, half these people that are going to go vote or more don't even fucking read the shit. They don't know what the fuck they're voting for. If they see 2 marijuanas on there, though, they might vote yes for both of them. Who knows? You know what? I don't doubt that Lansing has some kind of strategy for this. But if you're running for governor, you better have a strategy for that too, because there's no way that you can be against marijuana and run in 2018 in Michigan. It's just not fucking feasible. You're not going to win. All right, medical marijuana enforcement hazy as state forms rules. And this is what's going on, guys. I talked about it in some other videos about how they said, oh yeah, you can do your you know, if you own a dispensary currently, you can stay open until the licensing process is done. All right. Well, that, you know, there's still people getting cease and desist orders. There's still people going to jail for tickets they got last year. There's still people that have court cases where they're looking at prison time. It's almost impossible to drive to the Capitol Dome without seeing scores of shops and blows with bright green medical crosses and plucky names. See, I don't like this writing. This is why I made the channel. You're making fun of the names. That's called capitalism last time I checked. All right? Capitalism, basically, whatever sells is what sells. And now you're making fun of names. I hate this. How you got it. That's why I do this channel, man. A constant stream of people filter in and out of these pot shops, they say. Oh, ridiculous. In major cities such as Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, Lansing, and Flint, medical marijuana dispensaries are largely left alone. In other areas, however, police follow federal and state law, in effect treating medical marijuana as an illegal narcotic and public safety issue. Regional state police drug teams have raided and closed dispensaries with the help of county prosecutors across the state, including in Grand Traverse, Kent, Oscoda, Otsego, St. Clair, and Wexford counties. This unequal treatment occurs as Michigan implements new regulations on everything the industry does, from growing to transporting to selling. On December 15th, those trying to get into or stay in business can submit applications for an official state license. It has been unclear since voters approved a 2008 referendum allowing marijuana for medical use what the state's law actually permitted. In 2013, the Michigan Supreme Court decided that dispensaries are illegal. But the ruling left some communities without local access to medical pot, while others have a glut. I don't know if anybody actually have a glut, maybe like Detroit, but still, you're still not even, I don't know, never mind. Still others face legal fees and prison. Quote, I've shed tears over this. This has never been about money for me, said Chad Morrow, a 39-year-old Gaylord resident and former dispensary owner facing up to 7 years in prison. To have that taken away, it's disheartening and heartbreaking, honestly. Although Morrow obtained permission from the Gaylord Planning Commission and the City Council to open a dispensary called Cloud 45, it was raided multiple times by a regional state police drug unit before he closed it in 2016 pending criminal charges. Mixed messages from the state also helped inspire at least one medical marijuana crackdown in Grand Traverse County, the most recent countywide enforcement action against dispensaries operating for years. Police sometimes conduct raids even if the prosecutor doesn't play ball, said lawyers specializing in marijuana cases. Quote, I think Traverse City had the largest concentration of places north of Lansing, so it was the biggest target, said Matt Abel, a criminal defense attorney in Detroit and an expert on marijuana cases. why they were doing it now when these places have existed for years. It makes us think it has something to do with the up and coming licensing. They see this as an opportunity to clear the playing field and the patients be damned. And that's the quote I'm hearing from basically everywhere where this is happening, not just Michigan, but it's always like, oh, yeah, we'll just arrest all those people growing weed and selling it at dispensaries now, and then you can come in and take over. And I mean, that's the way the whole country of Canada is going right now. The prosecutor in Grand Traverse County helped close all 8 of the county's dispensaries in October after state regulators said staying open past December 15th application opening would hurt such shops' chances of getting a license to do business legally. In November, the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs changed course and issued an emergency rule telling pot shops that staying open past mid-December wouldn't hurt their licensing chances, but Grand Traverse County Prosecutor Robert Cooney already had issued cease and desist letters to 4 medical marijuana shops in Traverse City and 4 others around the county. Captain Michael Caldwell, state police commander for the region, said regional state police drug unit called Traverse Narcotics Team, or TNT, acted because dispensaries are illegal. Caldwell would not say why the probe began in September when the dispensaries were open for business for years beforehand. Quote, no, I can't comment on any specifics of those investigations, he said. Once these owners obtain legal license to operate a dispensary, then they have nothing to fear. However, until that happens, they're in violation of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, and they're subject to enforcement action. And I hope that the juries, if in these cases, see through this bullshit, because we're right on the edge of licenses and the license processes beginning and all that shit. And they just came out with a thing saying, "Oh, you know what? We're not gonna, give you any hassle if you're an existing dispensary and you want to stay open." No, not so much settled for this guy here. No, they're gonna raid him anyway. Yeah, they raided him. Cooney said his cease and desist letters were in part prodded by comments from state Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board members Donald Bailey, a retired state police sergeant from Traverse City who worked in drug enforcement. And this is basically exactly what I said when all this was when that happened back then, when Bailey said, "Oh, you should all shut down today or by September 15th." And I said at the time, I'm like, he's just a board member on a licensing board. Like, he don't have the authority to make rules that would actually get or call for some massive movement of the entire Michigan State Police to just go out and raid all these dispensaries. Who knows how many of them there are? Like, there could be over 1,000 of them operating for all I know. I don't even know, but I'm sure they do. And he didn't have the authority to do anything like that, but being that he was a former state police sergeant and knows a lot of people, I feared that somebody, there was going to be some raids happening just on his, on his words, on his threats. And that's basically what you're seeing right here. It's basically what Cooney said. Oh, you know what? I seen Bailey. I was paying attention to that meeting where Bailey was like, "Hey, shut him down." And, I figured, hey, let's go shut them down. So, wow, this is scary shit, man. At an August meeting, Bailey said he wanted to close all dispensaries before licenses were issued to be in line with the Supreme Court ruling. No, he also said that thing that we just heard earlier, where he wanted it to be fair for people that were getting licenses. As in, they're going to get a license and they had to go through all the legal process and stuff. So there wouldn't be these guys operating while they're going through the process, making money and doing all this stuff that they're being held to a higher standard to do. And that's understandable, but there was a date that you could put out there in the future that would have been reasonable, or to say that if somebody is putting in an application, then they can stay open after that date or whatever. Not just, hey, guess what? I decided that if y'all don't shut down by next week, cease and desist order for every dispensary in Michigan starting right now. No. Bailey's motion was met with sustained public outcry before Laura told the board at a later meeting that it did not have the authority to shut down dispensaries. With Bailey's comments and Laura's prior warning that provisioning centers could sabotage their licensing chances by staying open past the mid-December application deadline, led Cooney to believe that the state wanted them shuttered. To me, that indicated that the state really wants these illegally operating businesses shut down before the new law, he said, indicating he thought that the state localities wanted to collect taxes and licensing fees and legal businesses under new state laws. All true, but not until, a certain deadline or date. Cooney informed the dispensaries in a letter that the state law does not allow them to sell medical marijuana. The law allows a caregiver to cultivate and grow medical marijuana for up to 5 patients. First Lieutenant Josh Lader, a state police commander at the Houghton Lake Post in northern Michigan, said police have been monitoring the Grand Traverse dispensaries for some time, and the biggest reason they acted was because every one of the places that the team contacted were operating in violation of Michigan law. Although dispensaries are currently illegal, many patients have argued that finding medical pot would be difficult if all the shops closed. Michigan lacks enough licensed caregivers to provide for all its patients. There are 272,215 patients and 43,266 caregivers in Michigan, or more than 6 patients for every caregiver. Caregivers can only grow medical marijuana for up to 5 patients each, and including themselves making a total of 6. State Police spokeswoman Shannon Banner said the department keeps no statistics on the medical marijuana dispensary raids and that enforcement occurs on a case-by-case basis. She declined to say why some police units crack down on dispensaries while others don't. Quote, sometimes enforcement is a result of local ordinance, sometimes it's related to other criminal activity, Banner said in an email. But dispensaries across the state sell marijuana to more than 5 patients without legal repercussion. Quote, the county prosecutors let them do it, said Barton Morris, a Royal Oak criminal defense attorney specializing in marijuana cases. Pro-marijuana lawyers like Abel and Morris say the patchwork of enforcement happens in the absence of centralized state police orders. They say ambitious local narcotics units such as TNT work to find prosecutors who are willing to cooperate. By contrast, Washtenaw County prosecutor Brian Mackey said he deals with much more pressing issues. Local police and county prosecutors are just inundated with domestic violence, murder, rape, and armed robbery, he said. Quote, marijuana is not a number one priority in the county, said Mackey, who indicated he does not favor legalizing recreational marijuana use. Quote, we elevate cases that come to us, evaluate, rather. I'm sure they elevate them too. We don't get a great many of them. In 2016, 12 dispensaries in Oscoda and Otsego counties were raided by regional state police narcotics task forces. In August of that year, the owners and workers of the dispensary called Northern Michigan Caregivers in Lewiston turned themselves into police following warrants issued for their arrests and charges that stem from running the dispensary. Delbert Curio, 59, ran the shop with his wife Brandy for nearly 4 years before a judge issued a search warrant following 2 controlled buys to prove the dispensary actually sells medical marijuana. Curio even took pains to register his business with the Oscoda County Clerk, according to the State Police Incident Report. Delbert and Brandy Curio operated the business very openly and obviously with the belief that their transactions and activities would be protected by the Medical Marijuana Act, defense lawyer Morris wrote in a 2016 sentencing memo. The Straits Area Narcotics Unit seized about $2,700 in cash and all the shop's marijuana and marijuana derivatives, such as liquid THC and edibles. The county prosecutor initially threatened Curio with up to 50 years in prison for delivering and manufacturing marijuana, operating or maintaining a laboratory, and maintaining a drug house, according to the court document. Instead, Delbert ended up getting 4 years of probation and permission from a local judge to use medical marijuana to treat his lung cancer. It's incomprehensible that state police are still busting people as other state officials attempt to work out the regulatory details that will lay the groundwork for huge profits in the marijuana industry, said Michael Colmorn, a Farmington Hills-based defense lawyer specializing in marijuana cases. Quote, it cannot be reconciled with any kind of logic, Colmorn said. And meanwhile, yeah, the marijuana lawyers are going to get their paychecks. I mean, no one can fight this, I guess. This is just basically a case-by-case basis, like they said. And like I've been saying since this public act went into effect, when Snyder signed it, I said, well, now's the time for you, if you run a dispensary, to go ahead and check out your local municipality and make sure that everything's okay. And even then, maybe go up to the next level if you have one of these like Fang or Sane or one of these narcotics groups in your area. Talk to them. And back to those medical marijuana licenses we were talking about earlier. Um, yeah, we got one more story too. I forgot about. Yeah, back to that. I don't know if I really understand this, but so there's transition rules for medical marijuana businesses. When I back in the day, I read this business plan thing where you want to go get a MMFLA license. Well, part of the growing thing is to be a grower. I think it's to be a grower. Maybe some other things you had to be an actual caregiver for 2 years or something like that. So I'm personally wondering how a lot of these caregivers, a lot of them aren't really interested in any of this. You have to give up your caregiver status, and a lot of people that are good-hearted caregivers are just doing this for the sake of being a caregiver. They're not doing this to try to make a big name for themselves or make a shitload of money, selling fucking weed. Michigan medical marijuana facilities will pay a $6,000 one-time application fee to the state, according to the advisory bulletin released today by the state Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. Woo, 6,000. I'm already like, ugh. I'm out. I mean, I'm not trying to make millions of dollars off of marijuana, and every single step of the way, they're acting like anything that you do in this Facilities Act is going to be some kind of a super big money maker, and you're going to be able to afford, big application fee here. We have other fees and assessments. Medical marijuana facilities are subject to a municipality fee of up to $5,000 collected by local government and an annual regulatory assessment fee paid to the state. That's enough of that, man. The amount for the latter fee will reset each year, the bulletin said. And the state annual fee for the upcoming year has to be determined because it'll be based on the number of license applicants, Laura spokesman David Harns said. The intent is to divide the program costs by the number of applicants so the regulatory program is self-funding, he said. Laura also issued a bulletin about the transition from medical marijuana caregivers and patients to licensed facility holders and employees. I mean, they're acting like the caregivers and patients before was just some kind of a drug cartel. Like the caregiver grew a bunch of weed and then the patients came by and bought it and then they somehow sold it. And now we're going to let you guys all come into the light, with facilities and licenses. The Medical Marijuana Facilities License Act requires growers and processor facility licenses to have at least, so processor and growers, you have to have at least 2 years experience as a caregiver, have an active employee with such experience. So as a caregiver who's been in the game for a few years, basically I would just be like, hey, over here, hire me, because there's no way that a caregiver is going to have the kind of money that's going to be required to pay all these fees and assessments. As you've seen, you had to show these assets. However, the bulletin points out a licensed grower, processor, or their employees must not be registered as a caregiver. So, now I'm going to be an employee. And as soon as I go punch in, I can no longer be a caregiver. So, wow. Sorry, patients. But guess what? I'm working at a grow facility. But I don't get any ownership over any product in that grow facility. Even if you're the owner of the facility, you technically don't. Laura intends to require that any caregivers who get a license or employment as a grower or processor must cancel their caregiver status within 5 business days. So, maybe not right when you punch in, but by the end of that first week, you have to go ahead and rescind your caregiver status. In other words, you have to stop growing any weed at your house. I'm not sure if you can, maybe you can still grow your own 12 plants, so I guess it doesn't matter. You're basically just trading your patients in for a job. In addition, patients and caregivers are not eligible for a secure transporter license. That means those affiliated with license applicants as investors, direct or indirect owners, partners, officers, directors, managers, or members must cancel their registration as a caregiver or patient. I mean, I've read through the law or the public act or whatever you want to call it, and I've read all of this. Like, this is almost word for word right in the law. So it's nothing new to me. Patients and caregivers can work for medical marijuana provisioning and or safety compliance facilities, the lower bulletin said. So as a caregiver, I could work in a safety compliance facility or at the provisioning center. Okay. Michigan's medical marijuana regulations are in the middle of being overhauled, and emergency regulations are expected to be issued later this month, Harns said. The bulletins issued today are so that people can see our intent as those emergency regulations are being developed. I still don't understand why they can't make an emergency rule that says caregivers can take your weed to a, testing center where it gets tested, and then you can take it to a provisioning center, or maybe the state should authorize there to be super centers where, people that have weed that's been tested can take it there and whatever, they buy it all at reasonable rate, within reasonable prices, so that everybody can, still make their money off of it or whatever that they have to make. I don't know what I'm just kind of babbling, but what I am saying here is, I don't see a whole lot of people transitioning from being a caregiver to any of those licenses. Okay, this guy is going to explain the roadside testing equipment and what's going on with that whole.
The drug recognition experts are specifically trained to deal with and detect impaired driving, both on drugs and alcohol, specifically drugs, different drug categories, the signs and symptoms. So the drug recognition experts aren't going to be doing anything different than what they're currently doing right now. They still have to follow their same agency policy and procedures with making a traffic stop. And they're not going to be randomly pulling people over.
Okay, now those are some very important points that he just made there. That completely changes the criticism of this being an unconstitutional checkpoint kind of thing, which they do have those in places. I've seen them in Texas on TV. I've seen them in other states in person. And it was kind of scary to think that that's what was going on. And another thing he did mention is that these drug recognition experts are only allowed to pull people over under regular, everyday, they can't just pull random people over just to see what's going on, and just kind of profile people.
And making traffic stops. They have to have a valid reason. So they're going to be looking for things like weaving in their lane, driving too fast, driving too slow, not using your turn signals, indicators that would indicate that somebody's driving while impaired. And then after they make that traffic stop, they still have to establish probable cause with impairment. So they're going to run them through standardized field sobriety tests just like they normally would. The only difference with the pilot program is if they detect that there's impairment on some type of drug, instead of giving them a preliminary breath test, they're going to ask the person to submit to an oral fluid swab for the test instrument. If somebody does refuse the oral fluid roadside analysis drug test, it is considered a civil infraction. The breathalyzer and the oral fluid test is completely different. So the difference is the oral fluid test instrument.
All right, back to a couple seconds ago, he did say that it would be a civil infraction to refuse the swab. That's pretty vague. I've heard different versions of what could happen next. If you are impaired and they want to do like a roadside sobriety test of, make you do a bunch of tricks and alphabet stuff. I'm not sure what else can happen.
Is a preliminary.
I mean, it's like he said, they're already pulling someone over because they appear to be impaired. From there, and I mean, of course, you can criticize that, and I'm sure people will, but that's what he said. And then next is that once impairment is assumed, then they're going to ask you to do the swab. I don't know what happens if you say no. If you're obviously impaired, the cop, if he thinks you're impaired, he can't just let you drive off. I mean, let's be fair. Fair is fair. If it was an alcohol situation, they would clearly reach for the breathalyzer. They'd be like, "Oh, you've been drinking. I can tell. I can smell it." I mean, cops can smell alcohol like you even had a beer or whatever. They can tell.
Preliminary test. It's just like a preliminary breath test. After impairment is determined by the drug recognition expert, then chemical test rights are going to be read to the driver of that vehicle, and they're going to be asked to take a breath test with a breathalyzer. And that's considered evidence. This is not considered, this is just considered preliminary.
So again, to recap that, when you get a breathalyzer on the side of the road, that's not the official breathalyzer that they'll go by. They'll give you a breathalyzer when you get back to the police station for the evidentiary breathalyzer. I'm sure they'll talk about both of them in court. And your lawyer might talk about both of them too. So basically, he's saying that this swab isn't the end all drug test. So basically, later on, you'll go somewhere else and do more drug testing to get exact numbers and stuff.
Just like a PBT. So it's a part of the investigation establishing probable cause.
Again, from what I've heard, so each of the 26 drug recognition experts, and this is working for a dozen police agencies in 5 different counties. That's not very many. They're not very, that's not like another bad vision of what this might have looked like. People were talking about it being some kind of thing where it's just a bunch of cops pulling people over big time and wasting a lot of money and time pulling people over and doing these random swabs. It doesn't sound like that either. It just sounds like a real crapshoot, really. We'll see what happens. And again, this is just a pilot program, so maybe they're just gathering a little bit of data to see how it works, to see what's going to happen. I encourage people that get pulled over to exercise every right you can, because we know that people are going to get swabbed for medical marijuana. And let's face it, they've already made the statement that, oh, if we don't care what kind of prescription you got, like they're saying if you got a prescription for medical marijuana or Xanax or any of that, if they swab you and you got that in your system and you look like you were impaired driving, then that's how they put it together. We can only hope that that there's honesty behind this. I still think it's to get more numbers up on marijuana impaired driving, which is something they're inventing and going forward with zero science and zero tolerance. And I already talked about this. The dispensaries staying open. The medical pot shops that do stay open won't be guaranteed a license from the state. even if they have the blessing of their local community. But the fact that they continue to operate during the licensing process won't hurt their chances for a license. Um, so that's pretty much it for that story. And again, like I said, the asset requirements, the state said they were going to still stick with that. This was as early as November 8th, but I think I've seen something even since then that reiterated that yes, the capitalization requirements will stay at the proposed rates of 150,000 for a Class A growing license for people who want to grow up to 500 plants, and up to 500,000 for a Class C, which is between 1,001 and 1,500 plants. Quote, we've looked at some of the numbers that go into the regulatory costs, and this is a program that was supposed to be self-supporting, said Andrew Brisboe, director of the state's Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation. Quote, we want to make sure the applicants have the financial capability to pay those costs and get to the industry and be financially viable in the long run. Let's see somebody that said it's not a problem. Jerry Millen, who hopes to get a state license and to open the Greenway Medical Marijuana Dispensary in Wild Lake, said the capitalization requirements won't be a problem for him. He's already purchased and outfitted a building, and coming up with 25% of liquid assets is doable. Quote, I think there are good people and bad people in the industry, he said, and I think the state just wants to weed out some of the bad people. Ooh. I mean, I don't even know what he's talking about with the bad people. We've seen the medical marijuana industry in Michigan grow into something that it is now. And in the growing pains of that, there was a lot of issues with quality and pricing, and some of the dispensaries even were a little bit wild westy, I guess you would say, or whatever. Um, yeah, I don't know. Uh, I don't know if I'll be able to raise 300,000. She said during a recent meeting. Okay, that's just there's other people. See, that's the thing is this guy might not be having a problem with it or whatever, but I mean, every dispensary, just because they're small and they don't have like a million people that come to them all the time, or their location might be somewhere where there's other dispensaries. Just because they're small doesn't mean that they're a bad actor or whatever. I don't know what you're saying. There's bad people in the industry and there's good people in the industry. I think there's bad people in every industry, and it's based on greed and the way that the professional level professionalism that people have sometimes. So you got to show $300,000 of assets for a dispensary. So not a lot. Not everybody that has a dispensary right now is going to be able to pull that up. There's another story that I wanted to hit. In Michigan, we have this opioid epidemic, which the Gretchen Whitmer is making news talking about. Um, yeah, so just a couple numbers. Drug overdoses increased 18% in Michigan from 2015 to 2016, according to provisional data releases in July by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. There were 2,335 drug-related deaths statewide in 2016, compared to 1981 and 2015, and most were related to opioids. I mean, pretty much, more people die from opioid overdose each year than from gun crimes or auto crashes, he said, noting that there were 1,275 opioid deaths in Michigan in 2015. And on that front, for some reason, this doctor here was charged with distributing opioids to an inmate who died from withdrawal at Macomb County Jail. So now we're charging the doctors that prescribe the opioids. And if you look at this case, what you see is really that this was the jail's fault, man. The harsh way in which the jail allowed this guy to detox. They got this released video. I don't know if we're going to watch this. It's a 9-minute
But first,
video.
a Defender's exclusive. A local man goes to jail for an unpaid traffic ticket and never makes it home. Good evening.
Well, there you had the videos, and I'm sure that might have brought up the memory for people that have seen this case. Very tragic case. But quite a bit of people, including the 4 defenders, are pretty pissed off at the jail. After the local 4 defenders aired the video, the county called a press conference saying jail staff members deserve medals for trying to save David Stojewski's life. Unbelievable. And who knows why the Justice Department ruled that the inaction by staff members didn't amount to criminal activity. Are you kidding? Let's read some of this, though, real quick. He was in jail to pay $700 in fines. They watched my son die for 13 to 14 days, Stephanie said, his mother. I don't know why they didn't respond. Yeah, just a terrible case all around. The guards were telling other guards, "Oh, don't worry about him. He's basically recovering. He's detoxing, and this is all normal. He'll be all right." And he didn't eat for like 5 days out of I don't know how long he was in there, 10 days. For 5 days, he didn't even eat. He was in there for 13 to 14 days. And for the last 5 days of his life, no food. He lay on the floor the last 20 or 48 hours of his life, twitching, without any visits from medical staff. So you can do whatever you want with this doctor who, federal officials said he distributed an astounding 4 million addictive pills to Macomb County residents, many of whom are addicted. So it sounds like this guy's been doing business for quite some time, just slinging mad opioid pills. And, I mean, you can't blame him for this dude that died in jail. I mean, maybe that was like a tipping point for the feds investigating this guy already to be like, okay, we got to bring him in for this one. And I don't know, that sounds like a weak case. Like, hey, this guy died in jail weeks after the last time he had any of the pills I prescribed him. I don't know, just all around crazy case. That's all I got on the Michigan updates for November. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe for more updates on Michigan stories and other marijuana stories from around the country and around the world here at the Daily Dope Show.